Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third and last webinar, Run Inspired webinar series, our exclusive employee webinar aimed at enabling and motivating you to reach your full running potential. In this webinar, we'll be featuring Will Gerling, a high-performance nutritionist who works with Team Great Britain athletes, Olympians, and Tour de France cyclists. In this webinar, Will Gerling will share expert tips to help you prepare for race day, from the week leading up to the race to the morning of the race. He will advise. His advice will ensure you arrive at the start line in top shape. Will, the mic is yours. Please give us a brief introduction on what you do.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so it's great to be here. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'm excited to help you all towards the Abu Dhabi Marathon. In short, a little bit about myself is, just as Talib said, I've worked with Olympians, Tour de France athletes, I've worked with heavyweight boxers of the world and athletes at the highest level in multiple different areas. And in terms of what I do, I help athletes and amateur individuals reach peak body composition and deliver the best performances of their lives. And I'm hoping here to impart some of that knowledge to you so you can also have the best experience and the best time on race day. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Will. Okay, so before we get started, these webinars are aimed for runners who will participate in the most prestigious running event in the region, the ADNOC Abu Dhabi Marathon, from any distance from the 2.5K all the way to the full marathon distance. I'm going to keep getting questions as we go along, so I'm going to try to keep it as fluid as possible. The very first question everyone will ask is carb loading. Everybody thinks as carb loading as eating a lot of French fries and potato and spaghetti, and that will get them into top shape for the marathon. Now, what can you tell us about the concept of carb loading? How can we utilize it properly? When to start at the actual carb loading to be ready for the event date?
Sure. Am I able to share my screen with you guys?
You should be able to, yes.
Sweet. Can you see this?
Yeah, I do see the race day nutrition. Yeah.
Awesome. So if we go into here, so yeah, in terms of those aims, definitely carbohydrate is one of them, and I wanted just to go over like how I guess quickly you can run empty. So if we have stored carbohydrate, then the reason you want to carb load is because you can run empty in less than 30 minutes, depending on how hard you're going. So realistically, what we want to do is to carb load so you have more stores of carbohydrate, essentially more fuel in the tank. And we can see here that the more carbohydrate they had, which is along the left axis, that you are able to then ride for longer or run for longer at the given intensity. So realistically, what we want to do is, say it's cool, I'm carb loading, doesn't mean that we want to have like just pizza and pasta and everything like that and just completely overload your system with whatever it is, because it doesn't then it's all going to go in the tank essentially. What we want to do is have like a hybrid. Okay, and we want to do a 1-day carb load, so you don't need to do a week of carb loading or 3 days. We can do it in 1 day. And the kind of target amounts that we want to have is if we eat around 10 grams per kilogram body weight of carbohydrate, we're able to achieve sufficient muscle glycogen or stored carbohydrate in our body that's equivalent to 3 days worth of following a carb load. And this is obviously great because you're not over consuming all week, but then what we can do is have sufficient stores for the race day and just with the day before, and work towards being able to deliver a peak performance. In terms of like what to pick and what that looks like, essentially we want to avoid certain foods on that day, and that's avoiding lots and lots of fiber, lots of red meat, and lots of fat. And the reason that we want to do that is because they're going to be really high in calories for the red meat and the fat. Red meat takes longer to digest, so it can make you feel really full the next day. I think a lot of runners and athletes can sometimes, after a carb load in particular, feel quite bloated in the morning and quite heavy and feel maybe a bit uncomfortable. And having lots and lots of fiber, so if you're having lots of vegetables and salads and foods like this in the day before, or you're having, you know, lots of red meat, that's going to make you feel that kind of bloated feeling. In terms of the fat, that's literally going to be a case of that you're just going to increase caloric intake so much during the day that it's not going to contribute towards storing that carbohydrate energy, but also it's just going to add calories to the day and will negatively affect body composition. And then when we look at like then the kind of type of carbohydrate you want to have, if we then compare low GI carbohydrates, which is referring to the glycemic index, that we want to have more high GI foods. So high GI will be like your more sugary, easily broken down carbohydrates. So you're looking at your kind of white rice, you're looking at your white potatoes, you are looking at some of your sweets and fruit juices and things like this. And the reason why we're opting for those kinds of foods is because for the same given amount of food, so if you hit that 10 grams per kilogram body weight of food, that you actually store significantly more muscle glycogen, which is really, you know, the thing that you're wanting to do. All right, Taleb.
Yes, thank you, Will. Okay, since we are already on that subject, we have vegan runners. Now, you know, would that in any way affect the performance? And if you can suggest the vegan alternative for the carb, you know, for our vegan runners, that would, you know, I've seen a lot of vegan runners, to be honest, and that's another common question that I get asked. As a vegan, what can I have as you know, as carb load, and what would be considered a good source of carbs for the race day?
Yeah, so in that day before, it is, I think it needs to be separated from what we think is a normal healthy diet, because we're looking for something different. We're looking to store as much carbohydrate as possible in that day before. So we do want to work towards, and you know, definitely as a vegan, it can be challenging in terms of reducing fiber intake because it's such a huge amount of vegetables, but focusing more on like your cereals in the morning, if you can and like rice in the morning, to have that. So you then combine that, you know, that cereal with some fruit juice and some fruit options on top, a bit of honey and or maple syrup, and you're just combining lots of different sources of simple carbohydrates together, and then that's that breakfast done. And then you can have a snack, and then you can have lunch, which would be, I would opt for rice just because of the low fiber nature again and the high density of carbohydrates, and adding in some more fruit juice or a carbohydrate based drink with that meal is going to bring up the total carb content without having to add more volume. I think that's one of the big challenges for individuals doing a carb load, is that it can be a lot of food, and all of it and all that carbohydrate doesn't have to just come from literal food. It can come from drinks as well, and that can really ease the total amount of carbohydrate they're needing to get.
Great. So in summary, they can substitute the food that contains a lot amount of carbs with drinks with considerable amount of carbs, and that will kind of substitute or give them some sort of a balance when it comes to their carb load. It doesn't have to be actual solid food too, right? It can be any source that it contains carbs that helps, as per the formula, for example, that you provided, that as long as you reach that amount of carbs, that will serve as fuel on race day. So that brings us to the next common question is, what should I have before the race? What meal, or what's the pre-race meal that should be my source of energy, so to speak, on race day?
So here we can give you some numbers as well, so to help you kind of work it out for yourself in terms of what that looks like. If you're doing the marathon or even the half marathon, I would aim for around 2 grams per kilogram body weight of carbohydrate. So if you're a 70 kilo individual, so obviously 140 grams of carbohydrate. And what that might look like in terms of carbohydrate would be like a 50-gram bowl of oats, a glass of fruit juice, 1 slice of bread with some honey on top, and a banana. So that's pretty small. It's not huge. It's really achievable. And it's this breakfast as well, in particular, that over the next couple of weeks that you've got ahead of the race, especially when some of you are probably coming to those peak runs that you're doing, is I would start having the breakfast you're going to have on race day already. I would start having it on some of the bigger runs that you're doing.
Correct.
Because you want to get that practiced. You want to get that, that when you have that breakfast, you feel good.
Never try something new on race day, right?
100%. Exactly. So, tried and tested, you feel confident in having it. And then you can go into that race with confidence about what you're doing.
And how far off from the start should they have that breakfast?
I'd have it 2 to 4 hours before the start. Would be the most ideal. If somehow you're ending up only having like 30 minutes before the start, you could I would just have like really high glycemic
stuff it in your mouth and just go run with it. Chew it on the way.
Exactly.
What about coffee? What about coffee in the morning of the race? Some would prefer having coffee. Would that in any way impact the performance? Would it be a good nutritionist's advice to have coffee, or is it just simply a personal preference?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because in terms of like literature and science, caffeine without a doubt will improve performance, without a doubt. But
by how much?
You need 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight. So a typical espresso is around 75 milligrams. So once again, if you're a 70 to 80 kilo individual, you're looking at minimum for a triple espresso, moving towards 6.
That will keep you alert for sure, and it will increase your heart rate, correct?
It will, yeah. I think the biggest factor that needs to be considered is that high amounts of caffeine. If you were going to take it, you want to take it about an hour before the start, because it takes an hour for caffeine to reach peak levels within the blood.
Okay.
But it will be a diuretic, which can cause you to maybe go to the toilet a little bit more frequently.
Okay.
Less likely when you're running, but it's something to be aware of. And there is also a relationship with being able to manage heat and high caffeine intakes. So if it is very hot and maybe you're not very good in the heat, I probably wouldn't opt for a very high dosage of caffeine. And once again, I would practice it, because if you're sensitive to caffeine and you suddenly take 5 milligrams per kilogram body weight, you're gonna feel it.
Okay. All right. Still on the subject of caffeine. Now, you're familiar with the energy gels, whichever brand is going to be provided either on the race day, or if for runners who will take their own brand, their brand of preference. Now, that's another question about gels. That should I go with gels with caffeine or without caffeine? And to make the question is even more interesting, is how many gels do I need throughout the distance of a marathon, for example? Again, with or without caffeine. I know some running the marathon distance, they would mix it up a little bit, so they will have a number of caffeinated gels and a number of non-caffeinated gels. Some of them will go all out. All of them are caffeinated. Some of them, as you exactly mentioned, the coffee will give them that upset stomach, that feeling that they need to go to the toilet, increased heart rate that will affect their performance. This question is basically tailored specifically for the first-time marathon runners, because right now there is loads and loads of information online about everything. I mean, they could certainly just Google it, and they will find loads of articles, whether it's scientific or personal experiences. But since we have you here and you're an expert on this, what would you say on this? What would your recommendation be, or what is your strategy here to select which type of gel should I consume, or maybe your preference is not to consume any gels at all? If so, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, in terms of, I think it's a simple choice in terms of caffeine compared to non-caffeinated gels. I would go for non-caffeinated gels, because if every gel that you have will have caffeine in it, I think after a while you have just so much caffeine in the system that it will be of a negative, and a performance hindrance, really. So I would opt for non-caffeinated, and then if you wanted to, you could have 1, maybe 2 caffeinated gels towards the end of the race, like looking at your kind of like last 1.5 hours. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we've seen as well in terms of, if you have caffeine at the beginning to support performance, then a top up of caffeine later in a racing event will continue those performance improvements from caffeine, even without having as much as you had the first time round. But once again, I think if you stay with non-caffeinated, you're reducing potential issues within your race. So I'd probably go for that. And I think if we're looking at nutrition overall within a race, or if maybe that's an area we're going to dive into a little bit more in a moment, Talib.
Yeah. You can go ahead and talk about it, because this is the next question was going to be the mid-race nutrition. Now, in previous editions of ADNOC Marathon, they provide dates, bananas, oranges, and raisins in the later editions. Those will be automatically provided for all runners. But again, if you can give us a little bit more holistic approach or view on what would your recommendation be? Yeah.
Is there a nutrition sponsor? So will there be like gels and drinks handed out at the race?
Yes.
What brand is it?
Can I mention the brand?
I'm not going to lay into it.
The official sponsor for the sports drinks is Vitamin Well.
Yeah.
Okay. And previous editions was a different sponsor. For the fruits, I guess it doesn't matter. It's bananas are bananas, right?
Yeah.
For the gels, it is GU.
Cool. So, I mean, what I would recommend for everybody here that's going to attend this race is to get some good gels and to get some vitamin well drinks. Over the next 2 weeks, you don't need to like get a year's supply or something. And just go out on some of your runs and use those, because unless you're going to carry everything that you need on you, you're probably going to inevitably need to use some of those products. So it is worthwhile making sure that those products agree with you, because there are differences in taste, texture, and that feeling in the stomach. And even pop onto their website and get acquainted with how much carbohydrate is in each item. So when you do take one of those items, you know how much you're getting. And I think at the minimum, somebody should be striving to aim to have per hour over the race would be about 60 grams an hour of carbohydrate. And I would combine that from liquids and from gels and semi-solids and possibly some solids. And the reason for that is when we look at, like, from a hydration perspective, and I imagine we'll go into this a bit more, but you know, having carbohydrate and sodium within water will increase its uptake, so it will hydrate you more. But there's a point in which if you have too much carbohydrate in a drink, it actually becomes more like a food or fuel source than a hydrating drink. So, you know, a drink that's around 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate per 500 mils is an ideal amount to have. And then having a gel on top would hit you at around the 40 to 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. So you're just repeating that every hour, essentially. And that would be the minimum I'd be looking at. And if you feel like you can practice over the next 2 weeks to go for more, then I would strive towards that kind of 70 to 90 grams an hour if you can. But once again, you just need to train your stomach to be able to deal with that.
Is there any specific food that we should avoid, either not necessarily the morning of the race, well, the morning of the race, or even mid-race as a mid-race snack, you know, just sort of prevent any discomfort or digestive issues?
Yeah, completely. So I'd avoid all high-fat foods, as high-fat foods. So this is like your nuts, things like this. Some people have peanut butter sandwiches, stuff like this. I would avoid having those kinds of items, because fat will slow down digestion. It's going to slow down the digestion of everything else, and it's then going to increase your risk and probable chances of getting stomach discomfort during that race. So avoiding those, and then high fiber foods, because high fiber does the same thing. It will slow down digestion. So those fruits that you're going to be offered along the side of the route are fine if you have a few, but I wouldn't have too many in a short period of time, because one, it will slow down digestion, but also they'll have a high amount of fructose in them. And fructose is great for increasing our total carbohydrate needs, but it has a slower digestion rate than normal, like glucose. So I wouldn't spend the whole time having dates on that. Also, because dates are a laxative, so that also probably won't be great in another way.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you won't recommend dates at all?
I would. You could have a couple. Yeah, they're quite high in fiber. They're very high in sugar, so they're not bad.
But the word laxative is not good.
Yeah, well, that's only if you eat loads. Like if you were doing a marathon, you're going to do it in 4 hours, 4 and something hours, and you had like 3 dates every hour. The chances of you needing the toilet are going to become quite high.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. I mean,
especially whilst running.
Yeah. I hope the organizers are listening here. Because why I'm asking this is, again, there's so much information out there today in social media, and always people will try to go to the available alternatives. They would say, oh, gels are expensive, so why don't you substitute it with dates? It gives you the same amount of carbs. But again, as you said, it could has some complex ingredient or sugars that might cause you discomfort. I don't want to feel uncomfortable running a marathon, and going to the toilet mid-race is definitely not everyone's favorite. So
That's for sure.
I guess I'm in disbelief here. Like I never had it mid-race, maybe like 1 or 2, but not like 3 per hour or anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. 3 per hour is quite a lot. But as an alternative, like that's cheaper, I would just go for sweets. You know, like Haribo, like gummy sweets, stuff like that.
Okay.
Because when we look at the highest rates of absorption in terms of carbohydrate, table sugar is one of the highest performers. And that's because table sugar is a combination of glucose and fructose together. And all those sweets like Haribo are just formed from table sugar, obviously some gelatin as well in there. So a vegan individual can't have them. But that's a very cheap, inexpensive way to train, get carbohydrate in, and to run.
All right. Now, so we talked about gels and your recommendation and advice as a nutritionist, dates for sure. Now, there is also another ingredient another substance that people use usually during marathons is the salt tabs. So it's concentrated, easy to dissolve salt tabs. Okay. Now, what would your recommendation be here? Would you recommend them? Can it be substituted by simply just having the sports drink to replenish your electrolytes? Because there's some runners would think that having just water is not enough. So sports drinks are there for a reason. And some would also add to that, running a marathon, grabbing a cup of electrolyte, an isotonic drink is not sufficient for me to replenish my electrolytes. So would you recommend having the salt tabs, keeping in mind that a lot of the gels that we use do contain an amount of sodium, and some of them even higher amount of sodium. Would that make people nauseous? It's not recommended. What would you say on this?
Yeah. What's the temperature going to be of the race? Peak temperature?
Fingers crossed. Probably 23, 20 in the 20s.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
If we're lucky, maybe 18, but I wouldn't go there. But yeah, it's not too bad. The thing is, we might experience some humidity, and even if the weather is good as temperature, with humidity, we would tend to sweat a lot, and sweating does cause some people cramps, which is something that I will get into a little bit later on. So salt tabs, yay or nay?
Yeah, I think you can take them. You're definitely right in that. GU gels do have sodium within them, and then the drinks that you'll have will also have sodium within them. I think there's some telltale signs of whether you're someone that is a high sodium sweater, which is like having lots of salt lines on your clothes. It can be having dizziness and nausea after a very long run in the heat. Are very symptomatic of having, especially if you're having lots of water over that run, but you start to feel nauseous and have headaches, is a sign that you need a lot more sodium. And what you can do is, with that level of sodium that you'd get if you did 1 gel and 1 drink, or 2 gels and 1 drink an hour for the marathon, you should have enough sodium per hour as a normal individual losing normal rates of sweat over that race to get through it. What you can do though is you can also preload before the race with some sodium. So I would just have like a 500 ml, 600 ml bidon of water, so a sports bottle of water, and I would put, whether it's your salt tabs in or some extra electrolyte in that, and aim for around 400 to 600 milligrams of sodium in that bottle before the start, and I would sip that over the 2 hours before you start. And then during, you could definitely have the salt tabs or an extra tab that you can add to a drink, which could be worthwhile if you believe you are a really high sodium loss individual. But I would be aware that if you overdo the salt tabs, it can also cause stomach distress and slow down the transportation of carbohydrate if you have too much sodium.
Okay. Well, okay. So we have an interesting question here. I was about I'm guilty with that, but I don't know the science behind it. So here we go. Now I've done Chicago Marathon in October, and sometime after 35K, for some odd reason, I just needed to have Coke. I just needed to drink a fizzy drink. So there were people handing over like small shots of Coca-Cola, and it honestly feels refreshing. It feels like you get that extra surge of I don't know, energy. It could be just mental, but we've seen some ultra marathoners or trail runners do drink soda, and some even cyclists. I mean, is there any scientific reasoning behind it, or is it just
no? Like Coke is like a pretty great kind of ratio. I was going to say natural, but it's not natural. But like it just happens that the ratio of carbohydrate to fluid makes Coke a isotonic drink, and then it has small amount of caffeine in it, which will also increase and speed up the absorption of the carbohydrate in it. So from a scientific point of view, it's set up to help you draw on water to provide carbohydrate in the ratio of sugar, which is that 1-to-1 ratio, like of glucose fructose, which will improve performance, and with a bit of caffeine that will speed up the absorption rate. So it's actually pretty good drink to have in terms of a sports drink, really. There's no sodium in it, but it is pretty good to help.
Are you talking like during the run or post race?
Yeah, you could do it during the run, 100%. Yeah, you could take it post race too.
Any particular amount?
So unless you have a different type, because you know there's the sugar tax and whatever in the UK, but like a standard Coke that's 330 mils will have 35 grams of carbohydrate, which will make that an isotonic carbohydrate drink.
You know, you're gonna make a lot of people happy by saying this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would once again practice it, because running around with a can of Coke and burping everywhere is not going to be ideal. But yeah.
and you're saying it's particularly Coke. It's not any other fizzy drink, or any fizzy drink will do the trick.
So a lot of sugary drinks like that can be used because it is sugar that's the main part of it that is going to support your exercise performance. And if it's enabling you to take on more fluid, then it's going to be of benefit. I think the main thing you just need to be aware of is to not overconsume, because if you start going into realms of carbohydrate amounts per hour you're not used to, you will get stomach ache, and that will slow your race. But I think the thing that's unique to Coke is literally just the caffeine, ultimately, that you don't get with like a Fanta or something like this.
Okay, great. So now, since you worked with athletes and cyclists, and you're a cyclist yourself, is there, how should I put this? What's your general nutritional advice to stay ready and fit throughout the year? I'm not talking just particularly focusing on a particular event, but how, as athletes in general, or I would say community runners, for example, how could we be self-aware of, okay, now this is going to help me, this is not going to help me? Do we have that strict diet where we have one open day per week, or we shouldn't have any open days? Do you have any general advice on how do we maintain peak performance through nutrition, through our nutritional intake, all year long, I would say, not necessarily focus. Now, I know we're talking about ADNOC Marathon specifically here, but let's make it a little bit general, if possible, where okay, this is what we should consume. I think you put a chart a little while ago that has that ratio or that intake for probably the carb load week. But can that apply all year long, or does that only specifically serves the carb loading concept?
I mean, for that specifically, you could do that before any big run that you do. If you're doing a run that's going, like 3-4 hours, then you could definitely do a carb load the day before. And especially if you're testing and practicing your carb load, it's worthwhile. But if we look at your year as in general, and we're looking at, I guess you're talking about the premise and idea of continuing to improve performance. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing would be a case of understanding, learning through whether trial and error or hiring someone or just self-learning, is to, I use the phrase fueling for the work required. And that's the understanding and concept that, like, if I'm going to go for a run or a ride on Monday, and that's 1 or 2 hours, let's say, for 1 hour for a run, obviously, and then Tuesday I'm resting, and then Wednesday I'm going to the gym, and then Thursday or Friday, we get to Friday and you're doing a really long run or ride or something like this, that the amount of food we eat changes in level, in line with the activity that we're doing, and that's going to support exercise performance and adaptation in the best way. So you're going to get the most out of those sessions. I think the most common thing that I see is individuals, especially when they do the really big sessions, that they undereat on those days, and then the following recovery day that they do, they overeat because the body is so hungry and wanting so much food because they've undereaten so much that they then overconsume. And you kind of end up in this weird cycle of undereating on a day where you need a bit more food and overeating on days where it's easy. And I think that probably the number one tip I could give someone in general through a year. That, and I guess achieving just your 5 fruits and vegetables a day, which doesn't happen that much, actually.
Well, kind of sparked the question here. What if I go to the marathon or any distance without having breakfast? Basically, I'm running on empty stomach. What would you say to that?
I would say that you probably won't perform as well as you could if you did eat.
So not recommended.
Yeah, but if you wanted me to go deeper into it, is that when we go to sleep, whilst we're asleep, we will release and use up some of our liver glycogen stores to maintain blood glucose levels whilst we're sleeping. And that's obviously so you don't fall into a coma or anything. So you stay maintained. So when you wake up, those stores are, I think, around 60% depleted. And your liver glycogen is highly responsible for being able to maintain blood glucose levels during exercise. So unless you're incredibly well trained, both as a highly trained individual that's been running or doing exercise for a long time and is very fit, but then also as someone who's trained with low carbohydrate availability a lot, that I wouldn't recommend it, because through all the research we've seen, doing, high fat, fat adaptation kind of training and low carb exercise compared to carbohydrate fed exercise, whenever the circumstances are matched, then they will either perform equally or carbohydrate will always outperform. So carbohydrate is king, really, in endurance sport in particular, and will always outperform a low carbohydrate based diet. So I probably would have the meal.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you've heard about the wall, right? Have you heard of?
Yes,
of
I've heard.
Okay, it's a nice imaginary wall, but most of us, when we reach to that imaginary wall, it becomes a real wall. We reach that point, depleted, completely depleted. Glycogen would be like like at the lowest point, probably, maybe cramps here and there. From a nutritionist point of view, we would like your advice on what is the best way to basically avoid hitting the wall. It may be inevitable that we have to get to that point, but at least if we can reduce the impact of that wall, there is a big psychological effect here, where we reach that point and that's it. We want to just stop, give up, and just walk out of the race. But that's not what everyone wants to hear, obviously, because they want to finish this. This is a huge, big challenge to just finish 26.2 miles or of 42 kilometers. So from a nutritionist point of view, is there something that we can do aside from whatever discussed earlier that can help reduce the impact of hitting the wall, maybe not hit it as hard?
There's two kind of avenues as to why you might hit that. Mainly, there's obviously nuance to all of it, but one is that you're just not as trained as you maybe needed to be to deliver that duration of performance. So, if you're going to do the marathon and it is going to be, 4 hours for yourself or 3 hours, whatever, if you've never run that long before, the chances are you're probably going to hit a bit of a hurdle because you've just not gone that far. Your body's not used to going that far. It's going to be a challenge. But then from a nutritional aspect, if you are running within your means, so you're not sprinting the whole race and trying to push too hard, if you stay at your pace, then if you fuel and hydrate adequately through that race, there is no reason why you should hit the wall from a nutritional perspective. So essentially, because the wall will probably combine with something called like a bonk or like that sugar depletion, having like a hypoglycemic event. So if you maintain, and I think it's important because some people feel like sugary foods give them sugar crashes during a run or a ride, and what's happening is you're not really having a sugar crash, you're just bonking again. So because if we want to maintain blood glucose levels, if you're not repeating your carbohydrate intake regularly enough, you're going to have a rise in blood sugar level, you're going to feel good. And if you don't replace it, it's then going to come back down and you're going to bonk again. And then they'll have a sugary item and they'll come back up. And then once again, if you don't have it as something soon enough afterwards, you'll come back down. So you end up with this like peaks and troughs through that run. So if you maintain, eating consistently, drinking consistently, then you shouldn't really hit that wall, hopefully.
Well, okay. Now, with going back to the carb load, the week leading to the marathon, and how far before the marathon should the carb loading start? And along with that, now since we're talking about the wall and hydration, now some of us, including myself, we don't really hydrate well during the day, even though we should. Is there a particular formula of how much water we should consume during the day for us to be ready for the event date, alongside with, how far should we start a week leading to the marathon, 2 weeks leading to the marathon? What would you advise in this particular
scenario? Yeah. So carb loading, you just need to do the day before, so just 24 hours.
So 24 hours should be sufficient.
Yeah, if you're racing on the Saturday, the Friday is enough. And I guess my main tips for carb loading would be to start the day well and to start with high carbohydrate intakes from the beginning of the day. The last thing you want to do is get to the evening, have a massive meal in the evening, because that'll make you feel super bloated and heavy in the morning. So spread it through the whole day, use drinks as you need, avoid red meat, high fat foods and high fiber foods. Utilize some sugary items to help you consume total carbohydrate needs, because I imagine a lot of people are going to be eating anywhere between kind of like 600 and 700 grams of carbohydrate over that day. Now, if you get to a point where you feel like it's too much food, you can obviously ease off. Ideally, this is something else you would practice also, so it's not new. And then in terms of hydration, I wouldn't change that through the week. I would just continue to stay, because you can't water load essentially for the event. It will stay as just normal hydration. So I would just make sure you're consuming water, the 2 hours before you start the event. Make sure you're starting in an adequately hydrated position. I think you asked something else in there, but and I've missed it.
Well, no, again, like, how do we define being well hydrated? Does that mean that we just need to drink stay
During the race.
hydrated during the week leading to the race, meaning that every day we need to consume like 2 liters of water, for example, or that is not necessarily the case? We can just like the carb load, can we just have enough water the night before or the day before throughout the day that would be sufficient for the race day?
There's a couple of things you can do, yeah. So like, as a general water recommendation, having anywhere between 0.024 and 0.034 times your body weight in kilos should equate to how much water you have per day. So that's why 70, that's like, that's 1.7 liters of water, a minimum for a 70 kilo individual. I think it goes up for the 0.34, and that's without doing any exercise. So then you add hydration needs on top of the exercise you do. And then in terms of the race, what you could do is, if you are going to do ideally an hour run as a practice, but just because it's a round number for what we're about to talk about. But if if you're not doing a duration of that long, work with half an hour or something. But if you weigh yourself before your run and then do your run, account for all the items that you have during the run, so fluid and gels in terms of weight, and then weigh yourself afterwards, so drying yourself off with a towel and weighing yourself, then the amount of loss that you have on the scale, and let's say you drank just 1 bottle of water, which is 500 mils, and you lost 1 kilo, over that 1 hour run, you lost 1.5 liters of water, essentially. You can then strive to achieve a certain amount of fluid per hour over that race. Now, I wouldn't try and achieve matched levels. If you're losing a liter an hour, let's say, for you to drink a liter an hour is a hell of a lot of fluid. So you essentially just want to manage how much of that you're getting. And if you're losing a liter an hour, I'd probably aim for about a bottle to half a bottle an hour. A bottle and a half, sorry.
While we're still on the subject, now some runners would prefer running with a hydration pack to have enough, to have water with them along the way. Now, I'm not asking if this is necessary or not, it's personal preference, but what should be our hydration strategy running a marathon? Should we hydrate? There will be a hydration stop probably every, I would say 5 kilometers, if not less, if not 3 kilometers, for example. So let's assume that there will be a hydration stop every 5 kilometers. Yeah. Now, in that stop, usually when I've done Chicago, for example, they give you the water or the isotonic drink in a cup. It's not even full filled. It's
Yeah.
like half a cup.
You spill it as you grab it.
Yeah, when you drink it, half of it is on your face, and and
Yeah.
so you need, over here they might serve it in bottles of 200 mLs or 500 ml or 330 mLs. Now, is there a recommendation for and let's keep in mind that when people run, they grab the bottle, it could be open, or
Yeah.
I personally won't finish an entire bottle just because I don't want to feel that I need to go to the toilet. Now, what is the strategy here? Should I consume, let's say, 500 mLs of water per 5K, or would you think otherwise? What would your recommendation?
I think about it more in time. So because if you do it per distance, the time it takes to do that distance will change per person. So I would do it in time, and I would recommend somebody to have at least 500 to 600 mils per hour minimum, really. If you need more because of the heat and the humidity and your sweat rate, because if you're a particularly heavy sweater, then you obviously strive for more. I don't think you'd need to achieve more than a bottle and a half an hour realistically, unless you're a unique individual. Because even in some of the hottest races we have at the Tour de France, the guys would have 2 bottles, 2.5 bottles an hour. So they would have a separate delivery of water that they might pour on themselves for surface cooling. But in terms of fluid they actually drank, I think anywhere between 1 and 2 bottles an hour is and by bottle I mean 500 mils.
I guess this question comes naturally if I say, how would I, as a runner, during the run, would know that I'm dehydrated? Sometimes we just see water and we drink, not thinking that we need to drink. But personally, based on the number of marathons that I've ran, I would recommend especially for first timers, to drink or have a couple of sips of water or isotonic drink in every hydration stop. But from a nutritionist point of view, how would I know that I absolutely need to hydrate right now? Like, what are the signs that I could tell that I'm dehydrated, and I need to drink as soon as possible? The reason why I'm asking this is that from previous runs and previous experiences, sometimes we get very stubborn that if I stop and drink, I'm just going to lose that amount of seconds or minutes to the finish. So I'm going to skip this hydration stop. I'm going to go for the second one. And this again, you skip one, and then there's another 5K or maybe more, maybe less. Again, depending on also how fast you run. So what would you say here? What are the signs that are crucial for us as runners to make us think twice before skipping a hydration stop?
I mean, a key one is obviously going to be thirst. Like, if you feel thirsty is such a massive one, because we know that ab libitum drinking, if you're doing exercise that lasts under 2 hours, then a structured hydration plan doesn't matter too much, because you should have sufficient fluid on you to be able to perform. But nobody here is going to be doing the marathon in 2 hours. So I think we need to make sure that if you start to feel thirsty, that's already a sign that you're probably behind on your drinking. If you have dry mouth as well, that's a sign that you're dehydrated. If you're starting to get headaches and some level of nausea that's not specifically within your stomach, then also that's even bigger sign that you're either not hydrated enough or you're low on sodium levels. And I think it's super important as well, because in terms of sodium and hydration, that if you don't take on sodium during a race, or a marathon and you continue to drink fluid, you are steadily diluting yourself, because sodium obviously has a balance in the body, and we have a hydration balance. And as we sweat and lose sodium, this level of sodium is coming down. And then if we are getting dehydrated as well, losing fluid, that comes down. If we then only drink water, this level comes back up, but this one stays down here, which means the concentration of sodium to fluid has got less. And if that becomes too great of a disparity, that's where you get things like hyponatremia, and you're at a real risk of collapsing and, you know, having some more serious things happen. So keeping like a steady intake of sodium throughout the race, and that hydration amount, and knowing that if you are thirsty, you're already a bit behind where you should be.
Thank you, Will. We have 4 minutes to go, so I'm gonna go through a number of questions here, if you don't mind. Now,
let's hit it.
We are asking this question before. We asked you as a preparation, but do you have any nutrition tips and advice for runners with diabetes, type 1 and 2?
Yeah. So for type 1 and type 2, I think, as mentioned before, because I'm not a dietitian working with special populations, it's not my specific area to work with an individual like that. But when we exercise, you don't really require insulin to be able to transport sugar around, because it'll immediately go to the muscle and just be used. Having said that, you will still need to consume carbohydrate-based products to maintain exercise performance during exercise, whether you are diabetic or not. Just the level of which and how much you have just needs to be monitored more carefully to know how much insulin you may need to provide yourself during that time. I can't say it's a specific area. I know significant amounts.
What about consumption of regular medicine like blood pressure? And sometimes people take anti-inflammatory drugs, basically, just in case, just in case I'll take this just to prevent any cramps, or if someone is taking their regular blood pressure medication, would that be recommended doing it before, let's say, the race or during the run? Would it have any side effects that you might be aware of?
For like, if they're taking blood pressure medication and things like this, I would just continue to take it at the normal times that you take it, and just continue. I wouldn't do anything extra special unless your doctor's advised it for the specific race. Taking extra blood pressure medication would probably be, if anything, a negative to take before the race. But in terms of, I mean, you mentioned about cramps there, and we haven't gone into it too much, but if you're adequately hydrated and you get insufficient sodium and you get cramps, it's probably because you're just not used to running a marathon. It's a simple, quick answer.
Thank you, Will. With this, we would conclude our webinar. Thank you very much, Will. If you haven't registered for ADNOC Marathon, happening in a beautiful Saturday morning of December 14th, 2024, please do so. As ADNOC employees, we have a 30% discount code that will be shared with you after the event, after the webinar. Please approach us for the code. ADNOC employees and their families can register and avail the 30% discount. Thank you again, Will, and hopefully we will see you in ADNOC Marathon.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll be on the sidelines cheering you all on.
We would want you to run with us.
I'd be adequately hydrated. I'd be handing out the beverages to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Coke, please. Coke.
Yeah, just Coke. I'll be the Coke guy.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.
Thanks.